canine German Shepherd begged the park ranger for help. When he realized what happened, he broke down in tears. A lone canine German Shepherd appeared on the edge of the forest road, limping, trembling, and covered in dirt. At first, the park ranger thought it was just a stray, another abandoned dog left to fend for itself. But then the dog did something no one expected. He looked the ranger straight in the eyes and begged. Not with words, but with his body, his pain, and something even deeper, desperation. The ranger followed the dog. What he discovered in that forest changed everything. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's a story about loyalty that doesn't die. Even after war, abandonment, and heartbreak, get ready for a story that will make you believe in second chances and the power of unspoken love between a dog and a human. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more emotional and inspiring stories like this straight to your heart. Let's begin. The late autumn wind swept through the California Forest Preserve, rustling golden leaves across the narrow ranger road. Jack Morrison, a 38-year-old park ranger with sun-worn skin and tired eyes, guided his pickup through the trees. It had been a long week, campers ignoring fire warnings, a missing hiker reported 3 days ago, and now another freezing night was closing in. Jack was used to silence out here. He liked it mostly. It helped him forget the rest of the world, the one filled with bills, regrets, and empty messages on his phone from a daughter he hadn't seen in years. As he rounded a bend, something on the shoulder made him hit the brakes. A dog. Not just any dog. A German Shepherd. It stood there, still as a statue, one front leg lifted awkwardly, like it couldn't put weight on it. Its coat was matted with mud and dry blood, ribs faintly showing beneath the fur. But its eyes, those piercing amber eyes, locked with Jack's in a way that made his stomach twist. The dog didn't bark, didn't move. It just looked at him, as if asking. Jack stepped out of the truck slowly. "Hey there, boy. You okay?" he called out, his voice low, cautious. The shepherd tilted its head but didn't back away. Jack inched forward, keeping his palms open, low. He'd seen lost dogs before, wild ones even. But this one had purpose. When Jack got within a few feet, the shepherd let out a small broken whine, then turned and limped back toward the trees. "Wait, hey!" Jack called after it. But the dog didn't stop. It hobbled into the woods, slow but determined, glancing back every few seconds as if to say, "Come on, hurry." Jack hesitated only a moment before grabbing his flashlight and following. The forest was darker off trail. The sun had already dipped low, and between the trees, the cold air thickened. Branches cracked beneath his boots as he pushed deeper in. The shepherd always a few paces ahead, glancing back again and again with those eyes that felt almost human. "Where are you taking me?" Jack murmured. The hike lasted 10 minutes. Then 15. Jack's lungs began to burn from the cold, but he kept going. And finally, the dog stopped at a clearing near an old creek bed. That's when Jack saw it. A second shepherd, lying on its side, not moving, smaller, thinner. Its flank was rising in quick, shallow breaths. "Oh God!" Jack whispered, rushing over. The dog was barely alive. A long gash cut across its belly, and its leg was caught in a rusted animal trap, likely left behind by an illegal hunter. Blood soaked the dirt beneath it. Its eyes were half open, glazed over. And the first dog, the one who had led Jack here, sat beside it now, lowering his head, gently nudging the injured dog's face. Not a stray, not wild. Family. "Holy hell. You brought me here to save him." Jack breathed. He dropped to his knees, fingers trembling as he opened his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Morrison. I need immediate assistance at my coordinates. I've got 2 wounded canines, 1 in critical condition. Bring the vet team, now." The radio crackled. "Copy that, on our way." Jack ripped off his outer flannel and pressed it gently against the bleeding dog's side, trying to slow the flow. The larger shepherd sat beside him, not growling, not barking, just watching, trusting. Jack looked at him. "Where did you even come from, buddy?" There was no answer, of course, but something in the shepherd's eyes said everything. He had never stopped protecting, even after the world forgot him. As the sirens echoed faintly in the distance, Jack stared down at the 2 dogs, one broken, one brave, and felt something stir in his chest he hadn't felt in years. A pull, a crack of warmth, and the haunting feeling that this story was only just beginning. The animal rescue team arrived just as night fell. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees as 2 medics rushed from the vehicle with supplies in hand. Jack stepped back, letting them work, but the larger shepherd didn't move. He stayed planted by the injured dog's side, eyes watching every movement, body tensed. Not with fear, but with duty. "He's not gonna bite, right?" one medic asked cautiously. Jack shook his head. "I don't think he's here to hurt anyone. He's the one who led me to the other one, like he knew help wouldn't come unless he found it himself." The medic raised an eyebrow. "Smart dog." "Too smart to be a stray," Jack murmured. While the team cleaned the wounds and sedated the injured shepherd for transport, Jack crouched beside the larger dog. He moved slowly, giving the animal time to sniff his hands before reaching for the collar buried beneath the dirt-caked fur. It was stiff, faded, but still intact. There was a tag. Jack held it up to the flashlight beam. The words were scratched, some letters almost unreadable, but 2 things were clear. Ranger, K9 Unit Serial, 812 K97. His breath caught in his throat. You're a service dog?" he whispered, looking into the shepherd's eyes. The dog gave the faintest nod of its head, as if understanding. Jack stood quickly, pulling his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Morrison. I've got a confirmed former K9 unit here. Tag number 812 K97. Can you run that serial? I want to know who he served with." There was a pause, then the crackle of static. "Copy that, Morrison. Stand by." Minutes passed. Jack rode with the dogs in the back of the rescue van, the larger shepherd pressing against his side, eyes never leaving the unconscious one on the gurney. He wasn't just a protector. He was mourning, waiting, hoping. Jack kept a gentle hand on his fur. "You've been out here a long time, haven't you? Taking care of him alone. You weren't gonna leave him behind." The radio crackled again. "Morrison, you still there?" "Yeah, go ahead." That tag. It's registered to a K9 named Ranger. Former military, assigned to Sergeant James Connors. Last recorded deployment was Afghanistan. Honorable discharge 3 years ago. 3 years? Jack's heart sank. How does a dog like that end up abandoned in the woods? That's the thing, dispatch continued. Sergeant Connors, he's listed as missing. Went off-grid about 18 months ago. No contact, no trace. Jack sat in stunned silence. The pieces clicked together like puzzle edges soaked in sorrow. 2 dogs. One trained canine, one injured, weaker, likely younger, and no human. Ranger's not just a name, Jack whispered. It's his rank. When they arrived at the wildlife vet clinic, the injured shepherd was wheeled inside for emergency surgery. Jack stayed in the waiting room with Ranger by his feet. The dog didn't sleep, didn't flinch. He waited. And so did Jack. After almost 2 hours, The vet stepped out, mask hanging around his neck. He's stable. Lost a lot of blood, but we stopped the bleeding and cleaned the wound. He's young. He's got a shot if he gets rest, warmth, and care. Jack exhaled in relief. Thank you. The vet nodded, then looked down at the German Shepherd sitting beside Jack. Is he his father? Jack shook his head. I don't think so. Then who is he? Jack stared at Ranger. There was no single word for it. Not pet, not owner, not friend. He was something deeper. He was what stood between life and death, between giving up and carrying on. I think, Jack said finally, he's a soldier who never stopped serving. And in that moment, as the wind howled outside the clinic and the lights flickered softly overhead, Jack felt something shift inside him. He'd come to the forest that day alone, but now he wasn't. The next morning brought pale sunlight and the soft hum of machines inside the wildlife clinic. Jack sat in the corner of the recovery room, his flannel jacket crumpled into a pillow behind his head. He hadn't meant to sleep there, but Ranger hadn't left the room all night, and Jack didn't have the heart to leave him alone. The injured shepherd lay on a padded table, hooked to IV fluids and wrapped in gauze. He hadn't stirred, but his breathing was more even now, the color returning to his gums. A miracle, the vet had said. A dog like that surviving days in the woods with such a wound? Almost impossible. And yet, here he was. Ranger hadn't taken his eyes off the younger dog once. He lay curled beneath the table, head resting on his paws, ears twitching at every sound. You trained to do this, huh? Jack murmured, watching him. Guard, protect, endure. Ranger flicked an ear, but didn't look away. A nurse came in quietly and refilled the IV. He's responding well. We think he'll be able to stand in a day or two. Might be skittish, though. Clearly been through trauma. Jack nodded. They both have. Did you find out who they belong to? Jack hesitated, then said, The big one's name is Ranger, former K-9 unit. Served with a man named Sergeant James Connors. The Army said Connors disappeared about 1.5 years ago. Vanished. The nurse raised her brows. And the dogs? No record of the younger one. He's not tagged, my guess. Connors got him after discharge. Maybe it was his therapy dog. Maybe he was training him. I don't know. Where is Connors now? That's the question. After she left, Jack reached into his backpack and pulled out something he'd found in the woods the day before. A torn piece of canvas wedged under a root near where the dogs had been found. He hadn't thought much of it till now. But holding it in the daylight, he saw faded letters. A name. J. Connors. Jack stared at it for a long time. He'd seen veterans disappear before. Some couldn't go back home. Some didn't have one to return to. And some took their pain into the wilderness. He looked at Ranger. Did you watch him go? He asked quietly. Or did he never come back? Ranger finally looked up. There was something in his eyes that wasn't just grief, it was guilt. Jack's chest tightened. You stayed behind to keep the other one safe. The German Shepherd blinked slowly. That was when the younger dog let out a small whimper. Jack sat up. Ranger jumped to his feet, gently placing his front paws on the table. The dog on the table shifted slightly, then slowly opened one eye. Jack reached out carefully, his fingers brushing the edge of the younger dog's head. Hey there, buddy, he said softly. Welcome back. The dog tried to move but winced, his legs still stiff from the wound. Ranger licked the side of his face gently, tail wagging with relief. Looks like someone's been waiting for you, Jack said with a faint smile. The vet entered the room a few minutes later and checked the vitals. He's stronger than I expected. That older shepherd probably kept him alive longer than we could have. He's not just a dog, Jack said. He's a soldier. The vet nodded. What's the plan now? Jack hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. These dogs weren't just animals someone had lost. They were survivors. They'd lived something no one else could fully understand. And somehow, they'd made it out. He looked at Ranger. He led me to his partner without hesitation. He trusted me. Then, softer. Maybe it's my turn to earn his trust now. As the day passed, the two dogs rested side by side. Jack sat nearby, watching them breathe, feeling something inside himself beginning to heal. Something he hadn't realized was broken. He didn't know what happened to Sergeant Connors yet, but he knew one thing for sure. These dogs had been through hell, and still chose loyalty over fear. And that meant something. It had been 3 days since Jack brought Ranger and the wounded pup back from the forest. The younger shepherd, now recovering well, had begun to walk short distances with Jack's help. He'd earned a name, Shadow, because he followed Ranger everywhere like a silent shadow, never more than 2 steps behind. Jack was growing used to their presence. The empty guest room in his small cabin outside the park was now covered in paw prints and fur. Ranger lay by the door every night, ears twitching at the slightest noise, while Shadow curled up on a pile of old flannel shirts by the fireplace. There was peace. But Jack couldn't shake what he'd learned about Sergeant James Connors. A missing veteran, a war hero, and 2 dogs with no one left to claim them. On the 4th morning, Jack stood outside with a thermos of coffee, watching Ranger sniff at the air. "You're restless," he said quietly. "You're not done." Ranger's ears perked. Jack set the coffee down and picked up the torn canvas with Connors' name on it. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" The German shepherd stared at him, unmoving. Jack sighed and walked over to his truck. He opened the passenger door and whistled. "Well, let's go see what else you want to show me." Ranger leapt in instantly. Back at the edge of the forest, where it had all begun, Ranger jumped from the truck and took off down the trail without hesitation. Jack followed, flashlight in hand, boots crunching through fallen leaves and twigs. They moved deeper this time, beyond the creek, beyond the rusted trap. 20 minutes in, the forest opened into a clearing Jack hadn't seen on any of the patrol maps. And there it was. A cabin. Old, leaning, weather-worn, moss-covered shingles and a porch half swallowed by the earth. But there were footprints and smoke-blackened marks above a rusted chimney. Jack's heart thumped. Ranger approached the door and sat down. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He waited. Jack pushed the door open. The inside was quiet. Dust floated through a single beam of sunlight from a cracked window. There was a cot in the corner, neatly folded army blankets, and a shelf of books, manuals smelly, and a dog training guide so worn it was barely holding together. On the small wooden table sat a photo frame, tilted downward. Jack turned it over. A man in uniform, broad shoulders, sharp jaw, Sergeant James Connors. Standing with one hand on a young ranger's head, smiling with something rare and proud. Next to the photo was a leather-bound journal. Jack picked it up carefully and flipped through the first few pages. The handwriting was rough but clear. Day 41. I still see it every night. The blast, the blood. Ranger was the only one who didn't break. Day 76. Got Shadow to 2 weeks ago. He's still scared of everything, but Ranger's patient. I'm trying to be too. Day 134. People keep asking when I'm coming back. I don't think I am. Out here it's quiet. Out here I can still breathe. Jack closed the journal slowly. Connors hadn't vanished. He'd retreated. Something had happened, something deep and traumatic, and this forest had become his shelter, his isolation. But where was he now? Jack searched the rest of the cabin. No blood, no signs of struggle, just stillness. As if the man had simply stepped out and never returned. When Jack stepped outside, Ranger was standing at the edge of the clearing, staring out into the trees. "You brought me here for a reason," Jack said. Ranger turned to him. The dog's tail didn't wag. His ears were still, but his eyes told the truth. There was more to find. Jack looked back at the cabin, then down at the journal in his hand. "We're going to find him," he said. "You hear me? I don't care how far he went. We'll bring him home." Ranger stepped forward and pressed his head against Jack's leg. For the first time, the bond wasn't just survival, it was mission. And Jack? He had found a purpose again. Jack couldn't get the cabin out of his mind. Back home, he sat at his dining table. The journal open in front of him, Ranger rested near the fireplace, watching every page turn with calm, silent intensity. Shadow, now stronger, was curled beside him, his recovery a quiet miracle that neither of them took for granted. Jack had read the entries cover to cover. Connors had lived in that cabin for over a year. His handwriting had changed over time, shaky, then stronger, then suddenly scattered, like he'd started fighting ghosts he couldn't name. The last entry chilled Jack to the bone. Day 402. Ranger keeps watching the woods like something's out there. I'm starting to hear things too. I don't sleep much. I had to let the radio go. I don't want them to find me. But what if they do? There was no goodbye, no explanation, just silence. Jack closed the journal and ran a hand down his face. Something had scared Connors, something real. PTSD could explain the retreat, the isolation. But that final note, it felt like more than fear. It felt like paranoia. Or worse, a threat. The next morning, Jack drove back to the forest with Ranger and Shadow in the passenger seat. It was colder than before, the wind sharper, the sky gray with the promise of snow. They reached the cabin before noon. The air was still, but something felt different, like the forest was holding its breath. Ranger leapt out of the truck and immediately moved toward the east side of the clearing, nose low, body tense. "What is it, boy?" Jack called, following him. Ranger sniffed along the edge of the trees, then stopped near a patch of muddy earth. Jack knelt, boot prints, fresh. He looked around, suddenly alert. "Someone's been here." Ranger growled low in his throat. Not loud, but deep, controlled, like he was trained to alert without escalating. Shadow trotted beside him, mimicking his posture. Jack scanned the tree line. That's when he saw it. A flash of movement. Just beyond the trees, a figure. Tall, thin, wearing a faded camo jacket and carrying what looked like a small rifle slung across his back. Jack raised both hands. "Hey, wait! I'm not here to hurt you." The figure didn't run. He just stood there, breathing hard, eyes wide. Jack took a slow step forward. "You're Sergeant James Connors, aren't you?" Nothing. Then, a faint nod. Jack's heart jumped. "Your dogs are alive. Both of them. Ranger found me. He led me to Shadow." At the sound of their names, Connors blinked rapidly. His lips parted, but no words came out. Jack took another step. "They've been waiting for you." And then, Ranger barked. Once, loud. Connors dropped to his knees. Ranger ran to him. The man buried his face in the shepherd's neck, arms shaking, breath catching in his throat. His voice finally broke through. "I thought you were dead." Ranger licked his face, tail thumping. Jack stood frozen, the scene hitting him harder than he expected. The soldier, the war, the trauma, and the dog who never stopped looking. Shadow approached cautiously. Connors looked at him, tears welling in his eyes. "You made it too?" Jack finally stepped forward. "They never gave up on you, Connors. Ranger brought me to the cabin. Shadow held on long enough for someone to find them. Because you trained them to protect. And they did, even after you left." Connors looked down, guilt rippling across his face. I didn't want them to die with me. I was sick, Jack. I thought that leaving them gave them a better chance. You were wrong, Jack said softly. But it's not too late to make it right. For a long time, no one moved. Then Connors rose to his feet. Can I come back? With them? Jack smiled. That's why we're here. And for the first time, James Connors turned back toward the trail, toward home, not as a broken soldier, but as a man walking beside the only family that had never abandoned him. Back at Jack's cabin, the light was softer. The fire crackled low, and outside the first snow had started to fall. James Connors sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring into a steaming mug of coffee. He looked thinner up close, his face drawn from months of isolation, eyes haunted with memories he wasn't yet ready to speak aloud. Ranger lay by his side, head resting on Connor's boot, eyes closed, finally at peace. Shadow curled beside them, content. Jack stood by the sink, arms crossed, watching the three of them. It was the quietest his home had ever felt, and yet, it had never been more alive. You sure you're all right staying here for a while? Jack asked. Connors nodded slowly. Yeah, I just need time. You've got it? No pressure, no questions. There was a long silence, filled only by the soft ticking of the clock and the pop of wood in the fire. Then Connors spoke. I used to think silence meant healing, that if I just stayed away long enough, let the world forget me, the pain would forget me too. Jack said nothing, sensing that Connors was unraveling something important. I wasn't afraid of people. I was afraid of failing them. Again, out there in the cabin, with Ranger and Shadow, I felt useful, like I still had a job, still had control. Jack leaned against the counter. And when Shadow got hurt? Connors swallowed. I froze. I couldn't stop the bleeding. I didn't have supplies. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I left to look for help, but by the time I got back, they were gone. You thought they were gone forever. I thought I deserved it. Jack nodded slowly. But Ranger didn't. He found me, led me to Shadow, stayed by him until I could carry him out. You trained him to never leave a teammate behind, and he didn't. Connors looked down at his dog, his voice cracked. He's better than me. No, Jack said gently. He's because of you. Outside, the snow thickened. The world was turning quiet again, but not in the way Connors had known. This was a peaceful quiet, one built on trust, not fear. Later that night, Jack stepped outside, needing fresh air. He stared at the white-coated trees, the stars barely peeking through the clouds. His thoughts were heavy but not dark. That's when he saw the headlights. A dark SUV pulled up slowly. Two uniformed officers stepped out, one in military dress, the other in civilian clothing with a badge. Jack's heart dropped. Connors stepped onto the porch, Ranger close behind. The taller officer approached, removing his hat respectfully. Sergeant Connors? Yes, Connors said, standing tall, even as his shoulders tensed. We received word that you'd been found. We're here on behalf of Veterans Affairs. There's been an alert on your name since your disappearance. Some folks, they've been worried. Connors looked down. I didn't mean to scare anyone. I couldn't go back. The man nodded. You're not in trouble, but we'd like you to come in. Let us help. Counseling, support, evaluation, whatever you need. Jack stepped forward. He's safe here. He's healing. Pulling him out now could set him back. The officer nodded again. We won't force anything, but we'd like to stay in touch. You still have a life, Sergeant. A story that matters. Connors looked at Ranger. Ranger looked back. Then Connors spoke. "Can they stay with me?" The officer smiled. "That dog saved more than a few lives. He goes where you go." Relief passed over Connors' face like a slow-moving tide. When the officers left, Jack and Connors stood silently beneath the snow-covered trees. "You think I'll ever be normal again?" Connors asked. Jack shrugged. "I don't think normal's what you need. I think you need peace. And that, you've already started to find." They went back inside. Ranger jumped up onto the rug. Shadow followed. Connors stood in the doorway, staring at them. "They waited for me," he said, almost to himself. Jack nodded. "And you came back." Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in white. But inside the cabin, warmth bloomed in the most unexpected way. Through a man who thought he was lost, and two dogs who never stopped believing he'd find his way home. Spring arrived slowly in the Northern California forest. The snow melted, giving way to blooming dogwoods and the earthy scent of fresh pine. Life returned to the trails, the lakes, the skies, and inside Jack's cabin, something had shifted too. James Connors was no longer a ghost. He rose early each morning, brewed coffee, walked the dogs, and sat on the porch, watching the sunrise. His shoulders were straighter now, his eyes more focused. The deep shadows under them still lingered, but so did the light. Ranger never left his side. Shadow had grown stronger by the week, his limp barely noticeable now. The two shepherds were inseparable, training together like old times. Except now, they did it for love, not duty. One morning, Jack stepped onto the porch, holding an envelope. "Got something for you," he said, handing it to Connors. The veteran opened it cautiously. Inside was a formal invitation, embossed letters, an army seal. "You're being honored," Jack said. "The VA and the local sheriff's office worked together. They're giving you the Silver Heart Medal. For your service, for what you survived." "I didn't do anything heroic," Connors murmured. Jack nodded toward Ranger and Shadow. "They think you did." The ceremony was held a week later in a small town square. A modest podium, a gathered crowd, local news cameras rolling in slow, respectful silence. Connors stood on stage, his service jacket dusted off, hair trimmed, Ranger sitting proudly at his side. Shadow lay at his feet, head raised, alert and calm. Jack stood just behind them, arms crossed, watching like a proud brother. The mayor spoke first. Then a decorated colonel stepped forward, voice steady through the mic. "We don't just honor heroes for their battles," he said. "We honor them for how they carry others through the storm. Sergeant James Connors didn't just serve this country. He disappeared into its wilderness to survive what the war left behind. But thanks to the loyalty of a K-9 who never gave up, and a ranger who listened when no one else did, he found his way back." The colonel turned, clipped the medal to Connors' jacket, and saluted. But the real moment came when Connors stepped up to the mic, trembling slightly, and looked out over the silent crowd. "I'm not good at speeches," he began. "I used to think that silence would keep me safe. That if I disappeared, maybe the memories would disappear too. But I was wrong." He looked down at Ranger. His voice broke a little. "This dog, he saved me twice, once overseas, and once right here in these woods. When I gave up, he didn't, and he didn't come alone." He looked at Jack, then Shadow. "They brought me back." He paused, then finished with a whisper that carried farther than any shout. "I'm not who I used to be, but today, I'm not alone." The crowd rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the square. That night, back at the cabin, the medal sat quietly on the mantel. Ranger was sprawled near the fire, tail gently thumping as Jack handed him a treat. Shadow dozed beside Connors, who leaned back on the couch, legs stretched out, eyes reflecting the flames. Jack cracked open a beer. "So," he said. "What now?" Connors smiled faintly. "I've been thinking," Maybe I stay, help out with the ranger program, teach some young officers how to handle canines. Shadow's got talent. Jack raised his bottle. I was hoping you'd say that. The room fell quiet again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of pain. It was peace. Outside, the forest pulsed with life. And inside, a new family sat shoulder to shoulder, not bound by blood, but by battle, recovery, and a love too loyal to ever be broken. Ranger lifted his head and let out one soft bark, almost like a thank you. Or maybe just a final command completed. If this story inspired you, remember, courage and loyalty can overcome any challenge. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves heartfelt stories like this one. Because sometimes, a dog doesn't just save your life, he brings you back to it.